As Joe says, today's talk is the Govan School of Early Medieval Sculpture, a pictorial exploration. I'm not going to be offering any new scholarly insight into the topic. That's way beyond my capabilities, but we'll take a pictorial journey through the stones, the collection of stones, and I will draw to your attention some of the things that came to my attention whilst carrying out the survey. So let's give it a go. Yep, Govan Old Parish Church is remarkably big for a parish church, big in capacity, I suppose reflecting its urban industrial setting at the time and its congregation in the Govan area, but it's also big in volume and space. It's cathedral-like inside and remarkably ornate for a Presbyterian church. It's not really like what you would expect for a Presbyterian church, but it's very beautiful inside. And it is home to one of the largest assemblages of early medieval sculpture in Scotland. Somewhere in the region of 45 stones were recorded there, round about the turn of the 20th century, but somewhere in the region of 14 went missing in the 1970s, when the shipyard next door was being demolished and they got a little bit overzealous and blew up the churchyard wall as well. And in the clearing of the rubble, it appeared that 14 stones went missing, but we've got some good news coming up relating to some of those and potentially, I think, all of them coming up later in the talk. There was a major research conference on the Govan stones and the Govan School of Sculpture back in the early 1990s, I think, and the proceedings of that were published, edited by Anna Ritchie. Fantastic volume. I did a lot to bring the stones to a wider audience and to wider attention, but I still think it probably is less well known in the world of early medieval sculpture than places of a similar size of assemblage like Meagle or St Bridget's. I think it's still struggling to fight its way to its rightful place in the sort of hearts and minds of people interested in this particular topic. Having said that, in recent years, the trust that has taken over looking after the church and the stones have done an absolutely amazing job in promoting it, both to the local community, to local schools, and to visitors and tourists. There's a whole army of fantastic volunteers that do guided tours around the material, the stones, from around about April to September, October, and they've done an amazing job in really taking the whole thing to a wider audience. But how did I get there? Well, that's not a reference to the M8. A couple of years before working at Govan, I had gone out to Inchcombe, the island in the Forth estuary, in the Firth of Forth really, to survey this hogback stone. When it comes to making accurate scale measure drawings of sculpture, there are a variety of different methodologies that I use, but the truth is none of them are really all that applicable when it comes to something as three-dimensional and as organically shaped as a hogback stone. So in preparing these this measure drawing, I had to do really quite a lot of like first principle tape and offset to generate an outline and a profile, and then in the positioning the major features, and then working into the detail. So it's quite a lot of donkey work. I'm quite pleased with the result of it, and I think the observational accuracy is good. I got a lot of detail out of the weathered animal heads on the top and on the cross. I don't think, for example, that anyone had noticed before that the actual cross here is actually a ringed cross, very Pictish looking, or perhaps Scottish, like St John's Cross on Iona. So happy with the observational aspect of it, but the overall orthographic accuracy is probably not 100%, and that always vexed me a little bit. So subsequently, I went on, I think the same year, my interest in this type of monument was starting to be piqued. So I had gone on to record monument, this one at Dalserf, sometimes called a hogback, but I think probably scholars of this subject would probably call it a related object. It's more of a kind of coped stone, but still with the tegulations carved in it. And another similar one at Ancram, and then also another shrine monument, which has commonalities with the hogbacks at St Andrews. And for each of these three monuments, I recruited the assistance of my colleague Georgina Brown to do some laser scanning, and from the kind of information that she got, she was able to give me scale templates, which are absolutely orthographically perfect, and that really made my life a whole lot easier in doing these surveys, and it also allayed any fears I had about error creeping in to the end result. So there we have it. My interest in this type of monument had been piqued. And then in 2017, I attended the Insular Arts Conference in Glasgow. And one evening we had a reception at Govan Old. I think, if I remember rightly, it was sponsored by Glenmorangie, so drink was involved. And but it was great to see the stones again. It had been a while since I had been in, and it was just a timely reminder of just how impressive the assemblage is, and in particular the hogbacks. They are it's the largest assembly of hogback stones in Scotland. There are 5 in the one site here, and the hogbacks themselves, in terms of size and weight, they represent the largest hogbacks anywhere. They really are very impressive monuments. So during my visit there, I had a chat with Steve Driscoll, professor from Glasgow Uni, who's also on the trust looking after the church and the stones, and he sort of extended an invitation to come through and record the hogbacks. So the scene was set to go and do some work. So in February of 2018, Georgina and I went through, and she scanned the stones, and from that resultant digital data, she generated a set of scaled elevations, end elevations, plans, sections, all sorts of things. And these were, as I say, orthographically perfect, no distortion, no perspective. And that gave me a set of working templates to take back on site to then produce measured drawings, and taking all that hard work of measuring and plotting by hand, and also taking out that margin of error. But there still takes an awful lot of time and observation to take this, which is metrically accurate, and turn it into the survey drawing here, pulling out all the very, very fine details. This is the smallest of the 5 hogbacks, and in some ways I think it might actually be my favourite, perhaps because it's one of the best preserved. It's an amazingly beautiful thing. And although it looks well preserved, it's all there, you can see it all, and you know, this sort of Viking Age version of interlace, it's a kind of strange variation, a thing of its own. All looks very clear. There's still a lot of very fine detail, which I think we have lost. Each of these, it's supposed to be like a representation in stone of tegulations of like wooden shingles, sort of like a house for the dead. and each of these tegula, it looks as if they've been decorated with a pecked little margin just inside their outline. And also within this one here, we've got what looks like internal detail surviving. So I don't know whether that level of detail has been present on all of them and we've just lost it and it just survives on this one. But that's the potential, that we might have then had something like this kind of ribbing detail filling all of these tegula. And then on up here on the very top course, we've got the very faint remnants of like a stepped pattern going in and other things like key pattern going on. And then on the opposite side of it, we've got this kind of V chevron detail just visible and no more if you get the light on it. So I say, although this looks fairly well preserved, it may well be that in its pristine state it was even more intricately carved with just lots of fine detail covering the whole surface. It was also quite nice to concentrate and get as much detail as possible on the flanking beasts. Traditionally, hogback stones have 1, 2 sort of animals, sometimes naturalistic bears and the like, but in this case something more fantastical, I think, sort of dragon-like creatures flying as guardians of this tombstone. And it's nice to see, again, we've got here, you can see how the fang teeth sort of bottom ones and top ones interlock with each other, a little bit like a crocodile or alligator or something. And then the eyes and the swept back ears. Very nice one. So having done that one, we kind of felt like I was getting off to a flying start and just kept going. But as we go through them, they start to get bigger and bigger. So this one again looks to be reasonably well preserved on its upper areas, but we can see that we've lost detail down at the bottom, and it's actually been remodeled. At this end, we have an end creature, another dragon-like thing, quite similar to the first one, with sort of pointed teeth there, and it seems to be part of this panel which comes down the spine and then flanks around both sides, filled with a panel of interlace, almost like a kind of clasp at the end of the stone. And it looks as if someone at some later time has removed some of the lower rows of the tegulae and carved, pecked out and left standing as forelimb, which then would correspond turning this into a rear limb, because again they've added a little bit onto the end of that clasping panel, and the same on the opposite side. So somebody's at some point in history has turned this into an animal. It's gone from being a hogback stone with 2 dragon heads sort of clasping each end, one clasping each end, turned it into some kind of stone armadillo or something. I'm not quite sure when this would have been done. It doesn't conform to any type of ornament or monument that I know of in the Viking age, but it doesn't really sit into any formal thing that you would recognise as being something of the later medieval or post-medieval period. So it's a conundrum as to when this was actually done and why. So yeah, here we have the one surviving good kind of dragon clasping at one end, but the other one, the other head, looks to me as if it's been reworked whenever these forelimbs were added to turn the whole thing into a quadruped, and it looks to me like that head might actually be facing outwards, so they've reworked the whole thing. I'm not certain about that because there's not much of it really surviving, but it looks to me more like a head pointing that away, turning it into a sort of 2-headed animal, but they're both facing in the same direction. very odd reworking of this massive hogback stone. Similar thing has happened to this one. Again, we're looking at the surface, each of the sides being covered and kind of tegulated, but then these third row down of tegulae have started to be smoothed out or eroded, and we've only got a few visible, and then it goes smooth, and then they've been removed and glued back, and again limbs left standing proud, and then I'm unsure as to whether there was ever an animal head at this end at all, but the head at this side, again, I suspect this is a reworking to some degree or other, turning the whole thing into a, looks like a sort of dinosaur type thing. No idea when or why this has been done, but still a fantastic monument. I mean, these things are massive, and just by their bulk, they are very impressive to look at. This is, I think, perhaps the biggest, the longest. I think it's about 2.5 meters long. Must weigh well over a ton. Absolutely massive thing, and left surviving really quite well with its tegulated sides and sort of pecked out and interlace margins down each side. But unusually for this, the flanking animals at each end, it's a pair at each end, and they are on the end rather than facing up the spine of the hogback, and they are facing off each other, and with slightly intertwined limbs. And it's difficult to be certain, but they are hooved animals, so horse, pony, cattle, or something similar, but they seem to be in a different vein from the fierce dragon type things that were surmounting the earlier stones. This looks to be a very different kind of vibe going on here with this, and it's just, if I head backwards, oh, sorry, wrong way. This sort of worn out bit here, it eroded. I don't think that's accidental. Again, I think that's a later intervention where there's some legend about, I think, just, 100 years worth of bums sitting on it that has worn it smooth, and maybe that's the case, but it looks more definite to my eye than just casual erosion of people sitting on it. So somebody at some point has carved some kind of saddle or seat into the middle of this. And then we have this fella, which is, I think, almost as big as the previous one. By degree, we are getting simpler with these now, compared to certainly the first one, which has a whole load of ornament, as well as the tegula, and the tegula themselves look as if they've been decorated. This is a much simpler affair, with the tegula just running from top to bottom. And then we have at one end surviving an eroded animal head. And again, I don't know whether this is reworked. There's no real evidence of this having been recarved, but to my eye, this looks like an outward-facing animal. This looks like the eye here and the snout, and certainly in the plan view, that very much looks to me like a head pointing in that direction. So, this has been removed or eroded, and so we've just lost the corresponding one on this side, if there was indeed one at that side. So I don't know whether there are examples of outward-facing beasts on hogbacks down in the north of England, but certainly to my eye, that looks like an outward-facing beast. Yeah, there we go. Just, it seems to be that it looks like it's going in that direction. So, hogback survey completed. It seemed at that point, this was, I suppose, late summer of 2018, it seemed to me like a good idea to keep going and to record the entire assemblage. Previous work on it had been a little bit piecemeal. The sarcophagus and a few of the freestanding crosses had been drawn, but no real attempt, as far as I'm aware, to do measured survey of the entire assemblage. And I think measured survey reaches its full potential when it is comprehensive, rather than just cherry picking the nice bits, because I think it's then we can start to really make meaningful observations and comparisons within the assemblage and further afield. So I decided to dive in and just carry on doing the rest of the assemblage. So starting off with one of the, I think, what are there, maybe 4 freestanding crosses or cross shafts at the assemblage. This one sometimes called Jordan Hill because it spent some time at Jordan Hill House, I think, before it was returned to Govan. So it's the shaft of a freestanding cross. We can see on this margin here just starting to curve up, that is where it would have then gone into the armpit of the cross, and the arms of the cross would come out. So it's perhaps, I think, probably the tenon has been truncated. I think it would have been longer than that, but we're looking at the entire cross shaft here. So that gives us a reasonable chance to sort of, if we wanted to reconstruct this to scale with a reasonable conjectural accuracy. The figurative carving is not common at all at Govan Old on the stones, and what little there is best described as rudimentary. We can see here a horseman carved on it, but it's a little bit, well, I'm not an art historian, so it's probably a non-technical term, but it's a little bit clunky. And it tends to be, compared unfavourably with its neighbour Pictish sculpture, which is supposed to be where the influence for these things is coming from. And it's true, if we look at a classic depiction of a Pictish horse and rider, that is just beautifully observed. I mean, that its essence of horse in its shape with that well-rounded flank, and the actual gait of the horse, the position of the legs are accurate. You can look at that, and you can look at Pictish horses and say whether they're standing, trotting, cantering, galloping. They are accurately observed. And by comparison, this chap here looks more like a pantomime horse, quite kind of comedic. But having said that, there are numerous examples of late Pictish sculpture where all that refinement has gone out the window, and we're into a much more clunky attempt at showing it. This one is from Kirriemuir, and this is probably closer in terms of being contemporary with the Govan one than the Meagle stone is. I suspect these are probably near contemporary in their date. So compared to what was happening in some examples of Pictish art, the Govan stuff, albeit that it is a little bit rudimentary, it's not just as big a gulf, I think, as people sometimes suggest it is. The ornament on the Pictish stones is often very bold, and sometimes it works. These panels here are neatly laid out, neatly carved, executed, and that works, but other times not so much. And if we look in at this one, it just kind of goes horribly wrong, and it should be really quite a simple thing to do. If we zoom into it, it's a square panel filled with diagonal key pattern, and it really just has, or should have, 2 components which are then diagonally mirrored. So top left mirrors bottom right, and by and large this works. There's a little variation in how this is working in here compared to this. but you could get away with that by saying that the sculptor was deliberately trying to add in just a little variation on the theme, compared to this is like the basic, and this is taken to a little bit more added extra detail. But when we look at we've got the panel on the top right, and how its mirror on the bottom left, the bottom left just goes pear-shaped. It's just, the whole thing's gone south, gone freestyle. I think looks to me like, I mean, it may be an attempt at a variation on a theme in the way that he was varying this aspect of the detail here, but it's not worked really well. It's just gone a little bit freestyle, and in the end he's resorted to just putting this circular pellet in the middle of the panel as a space filler, because if he had taken all the background out as you normally would do with diagonal key pattern, with the freestyle that he's gone there, it would just leave an enormous gap. So yeah, variable quality. Another freestanding cross shaft here. Excuse me. Not much of this survives. We've got the narrow edges surviving intact. There's a little bit of carving just discernible at the top of this site, this face. But the rest of it has either been deliberately removed or it's been eroded. I think this might have been in use as a threshold or a step or something like that. There is a little bit of carving survives on this face, face D, but there's no access to it at the moment because it's clamped to the wall, frustratingly clamped upside down as well. But at some time, if it is ever removed for redisplay, I'll be straight down there to get a shot at seeing what's on it, what can be discerned. We've got a little bit of figurative carving on this one as well. Obviously, we don't know what we've lost in terms of figurative carving on this face and on the other broad face, but as it survives at the moment, this is the only bit figurative carving on it. And again, it's something rather odd. A standing figure is presenting something to a seated figure, or perhaps vice versa. Some people have hazarded a guess that it's a swaddled babe being presented, so perhaps a biblical theme, some babe destined for greatness being presented for a blessing to one of the Old Testament sort of prophets, something like that. But it is rather odd, and it does, the bit in the middle does look a bit like an upside down potted Christmas tree. So kind of basic in the depiction of what it is. And the panels of ornament on this one, again, are a little bit variable. You're looking at these two up here. Each starts off quite good at the top, but then it all starts to get a bit loose and gappy down here and a bit loose and freestyle down here. So there just seems to be a little lack of precision going on there in following it through. And again, this panel down on the bottom left here, that's worth a look at. There's a particular pattern of interlace which was very popular with the Picts because it brought together 4 sort of sharp returns of interlace, which in the gap between them created a little equal-armed cross in the negative space in the gap here. This is very popular in Pictland because obviously, as well as getting the decorative value of interlace, you're getting a reiteration of the Christian symbol. So here it is used to great effect on the cross shaft of St Vigin's 1, the Droghton stone, where you can see the interlace running up the shaft of the cross has no fewer than 8 little equal arm crosses in there, just doing their thing, reiterating, reinforcing that Christian message across, full of crosses. You couldn't get a better Christian message. And that's what this panel here should be doing, but it's just done so lax that it just doesn't work. The first negative space, the first cross, is a little bit soft focus, a little bit melted, but it's there. The next one's just starting to lose it, really, and the third one's lost it completely. So again, interesting thing here to conjecture about is this a lack of skill, a lack of care? Are they unaware of the potential? Are they carving a panel of interlace here and unaware that if they took a little bit more care with the laying out, that you could have this added bonus of extra crosses in? Or was it just not important? Were they happy enough that they were carving big monuments with bold pattern on them, and that was all that was needed? It's an interesting thing. I don't think it's lack of skill, because we have plenty of this panel here is skillfully done. It's been laid out, it perfectly fills, it all works. So there's no, I don't think it's down to a lack of skill, but it's an interesting conundrum as to why the full potential of this is sometimes lost. This one is referred to known as the sunstone, because we have this sort of spiral of snakes, which, yeah, really should be the serpent stone or the snake stone. We have this sort of two-tiered boss with these four serpents sort of coiling out of it. And then again, a very sort of simplistic diagonal pattern of angular interlace below that. And then on side the face A, we have a cross, again filled with very simplistic but reasonably well executed interlace, and these two kind of dragon-like creatures, a little bit of zoomorphic interlace, with then sort of interlace working its way back up and they bite their own tails. Again, a feature not uncommon on some picture sculptures. But our figurative carving here, again, we have an armed horseman, but this one, I just love this because it doesn't look remotely like a horse. It looks like a big teddy bear or maybe a baboon walking on all fours. I love it. It's brilliant. It's full of character. And I like the fact that our horseman here has his nose up. He is looking upwards. It's got a huge amount of character, but definitely on that kind of rudimentary end of the scale for figurative carving. And then, strangely enough, the stone is topped with a tenon, so speculation that perhaps there was something else added into this, maybe like a disc-headed cross head, sort of with a socket that would have sat into that. How stable that would have been on such a small tenon, I kind of have my doubts. But anyway, that's the speculation. Also, would perhaps seem odd to have a stone with a cross on the shaft, then having a cross head above it. But as we shall see, that's we do have another cross shaft with a cross on it. It's quite uncommon, really, but it does occur within the Govan School, so that doesn't write it out. And then moving into the recumbents. Again, big, bold, quite simplistic, but with recurring motifs on many of them. So it's one of the most homogeneous collections of sculpture anywhere, really. You know, it's most of the other big assemblages have quite a lot of variety in them. I think maybe with the exception of St Andrews, where there again there's a lot of commonality between very many of the stones. The recumbent stones at Govan really do hang together very well as a group. So you do get the impression of them being largely contemporary. I don't know what the feeling is in terms of the time span of their production, but there's a very contemporaneous feel to them all, that they hang together very well with these common motifs, like this kind of panel here down at the bottom. They are totally devoid of figurative carving, to the best of my knowledge. Obviously, there's a lot of erosion and weathering on them, but I'm pretty certain that they are completely devoid of figurative carving. But as I say, they group together very, very nicely. Many of them, as you can see, are reused with later initials and sometimes with dates into 17th and 18th century. But I think research has shown that rather than this being something that's been done on the cheap, it's very much the result of the merchant classes obviously trying to add to their heritage locally by acquiring and reusing one of these old stones. A fabulous collection with this big bold ornament on it. Holds together very well. And again, you know, that sometimes the interlace, as I say, is very bold. Sometimes it is unrefined, because as if you look in here, just when you start to follow it, we just end up with this one, two loose ends. The sculptor was, when he was creating this panel of interlace surrounding the shaft of the cross, he was not able to, you know, it closes itself at this end, it closes itself at this end and down here, but in the end we end up with this strand being tucked in there and just left, and this strand coming down and tucked in there and just left. Two loose ends. And the same thing happens here. We've got this panel that again filling the either side of the cross shaft, and we end up with two loose ends. He's not able to reconcile the design into being an enclosed loop as it should be. But a wonderful selection. As I said at the beginning, 14 stones went missing in the 1970s, but then in early 2019, community excavation had some people probing the surface of the graveyard looking for stones just under the turf, and a local school boy was doing this and found not one, not two, but three of the missing early stones. This is one of them. The other two got recorded as well, but then they were now turfed over. But I think that actually holds out for a strong possibility that some of the others that are thought they have been lost along that east side of the churchyard, maybe they're all there just under the turf. We'll live in hope, and hopefully one day somebody will get a chance to prove or disprove that, and hopefully better still get a chance to lift whatever is there, including these three, and have them brought into the care in the church. And then to finish off the assemblage there, the fabulous, the amazing, the unique sarcophagus, impressive at any level just because of its size and because of what it is and because it's unique. But again, it is actually very, very beautifully done. It fits nicely within the earlier part, I think, of the Govan sculpture, like the freestanding crosses in their execution. So a kind of mixture of simple and a mixture of precise and loose, but very, very beautifully done. And again, we have quite a bit of figurative carving on this, lots of animal motifs here. This particularly like this one with the kind of four hooved and sort of horned animals forming that little rectangular motif, and then this pair sort of look like they're biting each other's tails. And then a Govan version of that most Pictish of things, the hunting scene, the sport of kings. There he is on horseback with his hound, which I think looks like Nasher, chasing, well, I suppose it's supposed to be a deer, but it's got little horns. It must be a roe deer rather than a red deer stag. But yeah, lots of character and a little bit of detail coming into this, so very nice. And then at the other end on this side, we have this fantastic pair of animals and Brian the snail, and we've got this lovely ornament filling the upper animal. Beautiful thing. And then the section of the sarcophagus showing the drainage holes, so very definitely intended to have a body rather than bones, so never intended to be, if it ever was, a shrine for saintly remains. It was definitely intended in its first instance as to just be a coffin in which a body was interred. So, Govan School completed, it seemed like a good idea to just keep going and do as much of the Govan School as I could. So out to Inchinnan, and again we can follow the trail of recumbent cross slabs out there. But this, I think, it's certainly of the material I recorded, this is the only place where this type of monument out with Govan Old occurs, but very, very similar to, strongly connected with Govan Old, with the exception that this little tiny fragment that was found in the river in about 2009 actually has a little bit of figurative carving going on up here. It's very frustrating that the smallest fragment should have figurative carving going on. Difficult to see exactly what it is, but something going on there which marks that out as being different from Govan, whereas that would not look out of place if it was uprooted and taken to Govan. And the same with this. This is one that was discovered quite recently. It might have been Megan Caston, I'm not sure who actually made the discovery, but it's not in the collection of the early stones. It's round the other side of the church in the collection of later medieval and post-medieval stones, and it was thought to be one of those. But looking carefully, we can see the remnants of these big sort of interlace and diagonal things, and we've got interlace running up here, the shaft of the cross. So definitely it's been something like this. It looks very much as if the cross is about the same proportions as this. So definitely another one. And then we have this unusual one at Inchinnan. It's got some parallel with Govan because we've got a stone at Govan with similar border and with these large round sort of corner roundels on it. But after that, it departs completely from anything at Govan whatsoever because it has this massive figurative carving on it. And it's very, very different in theme and in feel. It's speculated, given that it's carved on its narrow edges as well, none of the Govan recumbents are carved on any of the narrow sides, but this is carved on all. So it's been speculated that it could be the lid of another sarcophagus, and that's entirely possible. I also think, though, that there are very, very strong Pictish influence on the imagery that's the figurative imagery carved on this stone. And we do have Pictish recumbents that are carved on all visible sides. So it could also equally be that it's just inspired by a Pictish monument, and that they've gone to town with carving it on its narrow edges as well. But it would be lovely to find another sarcophagus. If it is a sarcophagus, it is slightly on the short side compared to the Govan one. You could definitely, and in fact, I think people have lain in it. I think if you lay out on this, I suspect your feet would be sticking out the end. It's not quite as long. But figurative carving here definitely showing a strong Pictish influence. This kind of menagerie. We've even got a little bit of spiral decoration here, which is reminiscent of Pictish. We've got animals again biting their tails, and this kind of quadruped here with a human head that crops up occasionally on Pictish sculpture as well. Very similar thing going on the other long side. Different enough to show that it's not just somebody with one idea and it's just the exact thing is replicated. There's creativity going on here. Each side is different but on a similar theme. And then on the front of it, we have these things. We've got two big animals here which seem to be either devouring bits of a human or have devoured all of a human, and all that's left is a leg and a foot sticking out of their mouths. And then these two creatures here seem to be biting the ears of the head of a human figure in between them. Again, very, very strong Pictish themes that we find that it's again, especially around about Meagle, this whole big beasties eating humans and bits of arms and legs and heads sticking out of gobs. Definitely a strong Pictish influence on this. And then also in Shinnon, we have the shaft of a freestanding cross, which is similar to, but also different from the rest. The others, we can find comparable aspects of it, but it's not something that's been churned out, mass produced. There's individuality going on here. Newton Wood's little fragment of two fragments of a freestanding cross, and again we are looking at a massive figurative carving on this, which marks this out as being completely different from any of the other freestanding crosses of the Govan School. But they are, if we zoom into it a little bit, they are incredibly similar to the imagery that's on that recumbent from Inchinnan. We've got these animals biting their tails, we've got animals surmounting and apparently eating a human head. We've got another animal here with a human leg and foot sticking out of its mouth, and then this menagerie of other animals in it. Very, very Pictish in its feel. Capel Rig freestanding cross, which stood on a hillside and was excavated and taken into protective care in 1926. Here are the scholarly gentlemen and their team of workmen who were carrying out the work. The cross has been lifted and they're now working their way to free and remove the socket stone for it. And they were taken together and united. It's in the care of Glasgow Life Museums and was, I don't know if it still is, but was on display in Rook and Glen Pavilion, where I recorded it, set into its socket stone. Again, fantastic. We're freestanding cross shaft, very distinct tapering, so really quite different from the form and shape of anything that we've got at Govan, but the form of the ornament on it fits nicely within that Govan School, and that kind of don't really care attitude has followed us out to Capel Rig, and here again we've got interlaced panels with loose ends where the sculptor has not been able to figure out how to make it an enclosed circuit. Baroccan cross again stood out on a hillside up until I think about 1986 when it was taken into care, but unfortunately, you know, it's like we usually refer to the dim and distant past for bad practice. 1926 they took the cross and its base. 1986 they took the cross and left the base standing, and they really should be reunited. This is part and parcel of the thing, and it should be with the cross. It should be given equal value and care, and I would love to see it taken into care. I'm also, I didn't get a chance to get out and record this, but who knows, I haven't given up the idea of going out and getting the measured survey of that. So there we have, it's our only complete freestanding cross, I think, within the Govan School. it's been broken and repaired, and we have lost quite a lot of the ornament, and particularly at the top where the erosion has affected it worse. But it's lovely to see a complete one, and that can be quite useful and informative to a certain degree as to what form the other broken ones might have taken. It has more figurative carving than anything at Govan. We've got this panel here with, again, I'm not going to hazard a guess at what's going on. Someone, we've got a soldier, an armed mounted figure here, and a chap who looks to be giving the horse a carrot. And then something being supported between this chap on a stick and this chap's fist. I have no idea what that's meant to represent, and somebody taking shelter underneath it. A couple of animals. Probably something biblical. I'll leave that to the art historians to invent the story. And then on this side, again, we've got 4 robed figures. To them, there were metal clamps put in to join the stone there in the 19th century, and in order to make way for the clamps, a certain amount of the ornament was removed. That is the dim and distant past, that when bad things happened. So 4 robed figures, perhaps Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and then below them 4 armed figures blowing trumpets. So I don't know, bringing down the walls of Jericho, who knows. And as far as I can tell from what survives on this, there are no loose ends within the panels of interlace here. It's been executed with greater skill, greater accuracy, better geometry. And in fact, actually looking at the configuration of it, the interlaced knots on the side where gaps are deliberately left, and then a double panel and a gap, and then a panel at the end, it is actually very beautifully done. It's very nice indeed. Arthur Lee, another freestanding cross shaft. We're missing the head again, but we're on to this one with distinctive tapering going on, and we're back to that big and bold and really quite simple interlace and decorative components on it. And as far as I can tell from what's surviving, no loose ends. Nothing here really of figurative carving apart from these 2 little animals, and actually very, very beautifully done. They're like 2 little lions that are kind of diagonally opposed to each other. They almost look like some little detail from a manuscript, but I love the fact that their sort of tails are and hind legs are straight, and then the front leg looped, and then the backward pointing head with the snout coming down in a very elegant curve into the curve of its back. They are beautifully done, lovely little detail. And usually with a freestanding cross, the whole monument forms a cross shape, but here we have a panel with a carved cross on it. And that's not really all that common, I think, but here they've decided to have the cross at the bottom and to reiterate that Christian message. And then, massive one, Old Patrick, one sometimes called Mount Blow, because it was, again, I think, spent some time at Mount Blow House or something like that. This is now in Glasgow Life's Museum's store at Kelvin Grove, but I got access to it. I'm afraid I wasn't able, this long face here, broad face, face D, is supposedly devoid of any carving. I think it was thing was used as a footbridge over a burn, and it's apparently been worn away, but to my experience, even things like that usually have some element of the carving still visible under good lighting, but it needs special lifting. It sits on a pallet, but a especially big 2.5 meter long pallet to hold the stone, and it needs special lifting gear and specialist workforce to lift it and flip it, and that was not available to me. So again, that's something that remains on my to-do list. But we've got some figurative carving on this one. Up at the top, we've got a quadruped. Might just be a centaur. It's been defaced or eroded, but it's just possible that there was a human sort of head and torso in here, but maybe not, maybe just an animal. And then below it, our typical armed horseman sitting within this kind of little loose panel of interlace. But generally speaking, the panels of interlace on the narrow edges and below the figures are finer, and they are very well executed with real competence. So yeah, we're definitely, we can sometimes see the strong likelihood of the same hand at work, but I think we can also see different hands and different levels of competence and understanding of the whole notion of interlace and how it should work. And it's also interesting here that we have surviving the whole tenon. So the actual cross itself isn't that much bigger than most of the other ones, maybe a little bit, but not massively bigger. But what survives here is best part of a metre or so of tenon going into the ground. So it's a very good indication of how much stone was set in to keep these things upright, presumably again into a socket stone. Also, Old Patrick, we have this little fragment, and again, completely different from Old Patrick 1. We're back looking at something that looks like Arthur Lane Capel rig, this distinctive taper that's on it, with this bold, relatively simple sort of interlace panels. Again, like Arthur Lane Capel rig, and we're back to having loose ends on these panels. We're back to somebody who's just not able to reconcile this panel into being a closed loop. This is Kilwinning, little fragment that's in care at Saltcoats Heritage Centre. And again, we're looking at variations on a theme: bold, quite large, chunky interlace filling that, so similar to some of the other ones we got, but it's not tapering like Old Patrick, it's parallel sides. And obviously we don't know what we've lost on the areas of Old Patrick where it's been eroded or where we've not had a chance to record, but we have a whole panel of figurative carving here. So it looks to be that we're looking at perhaps more figurative carving here. And interestingly, it's King David imagery, again, another thing frequently referred to in picture sculpture. We've got perhaps a lion attacking a sheep. It could be a hunt scene, but this animal here with his big floppy ear doesn't look very deer-like. So it could be a lion attacking a sheep. And then we've got David as the harper. We've got one of his sheep set upright behind him here, again indicating the shepherd aspect of his life, and then David as the warrior mounted here with his spear. So that's again an allusion to biblical King David. And there is an arm of this cross surviving, which I think is in the care of HES, and again that's on my to-do list. I would like to get a chance to go and record that also, just for the sake of completeness. So there we have it, the Govan stones and their interconnections. Govan Old, predominantly recumbent cross slabs, all devoid of figurative carving, but all of which hang together very cohesively as a contemporary sort of block of work. And we can trace that out to Inchinnan. And again, we can see aspects where I wouldn't be surprised if some of these stones, if that's the same hand at work as we have somewhere at Govan. But then we have this one here, which has similar borders and corner posts, but after that it just moves into a completely different field with very strong, a lot of figurative imagery and very, very strong Pictish influence on it. So different things at work here, different influences coming into play. And those figurative Pictish themes get picked up again on freestanding cross at Newton Woods. So again, the lines of connection are there and they're strong, but they're not straight. It's more of a spider's web of influences and connections. This connects to that, that connects to something else, but there's no there's no real strong connection that would connect this to anything at Govan. But you can trace, like I say, it's like a kind of spider's web of connections to it. Freestanding crosses at Govan, parallel sides, some figurative carving, and a tendency towards lax ornament. We've got parallel sides at Old Patrick, but here the execution is much better, much more refined. And again, following that on to Kilwinning, parallel sides on the cross shaft, and bold, chunky interlace, but there we have on the other side to this our King David imagery, so much more figurative than we have anywhere else. Although, as I say, we don't know what we've lost on here or on the other side of this, so you can never be too prescriptive about these things. And then Newton Woods, parallel sides to that cross shaft, but just entirely figurative, and in a world of its own. Well, not strictly of its own, relating to that recumbent at Inchinnan, but on a world of its own, relating to the other freestanding crosses in the Govan School. And then also Old Patrick, a little tapering fragment, which just sits very nicely with Arthurite and Capel rig. And we can see similar pattern on the cross shaft at Inchinnan, but the form of the cross, again, is different from anything else. It's neither parallel nor tapering. It's a sort of bowed out version of it. I suppose closer to being parallel than anything else, but certainly a little bit different from the others. And then Baroccan, our only surviving complete cross, tapering, bold ornament, a lot of figurative carving, and generally well executed. And then sitting out on its own as a kind of unique venture is the so-called sunstone, with perhaps some kind of disc head added onto that tenon at the top. And then, of course, again, unique within the early medieval world, we have this fabulous monolithic sarcophagus with its 4 ornamented sides, and what we all wouldn't give to find the lid. How amazing that would be. Presumably it has a big cross on the top of it. And then, of course, the fabulous hogbacks, which sit very nicely into the context of that type of monument within the wider world, within north of England and dotted around other places in southern Scotland, Anglo-Scandinavian kind of things. But again, at Govan, some of the biggest ones, or the biggest ones from anywhere. So that was my work. It was a great place to kind of finish off my working life with ARCAMS and HES, but a lot of people to thank. It really was a partnership. Thanks to Steve Driscoll for offering the invitation in the first place. To Fraser and Emma at Govan, they just could not have been more accommodating, more helpful. It was just absolutely fantastic to work with them, and huge thanks to both of them, and indeed all the other fabulous volunteers at Govan Old and the locals. I was really made to feel very welcome. Thanks also to Megan Caston. She was working on her PhD at the time, doing digitally documenting the Govan stones, and she was incredibly generous with her imagery, and great at times when I was unsure what I was looking at to just email her and say, what do you think's happening here? And back would come a little bit from one of her photogrammetry or images, with a little bit of manipulation on it to help clarify matters. Also, thanks to the Kirk session at Inchinnan, the staff at Rook and Glen Pavilion, Katinka at Glasgow Life Museums, the staff at Heritage Centre Saltcoats, Archie Henderson at Paisley Museum, and everyone at Paisley Abbey. They all were incredibly helpful and accommodating, and I couldn't have done what I did without their help. And at work at HES, huge thanks to my head of section and line manager, Robin and Ian, for their support and letting me get on with this work, and basically saying, don't need to turn up for Monday meetings, just get out there and get on with your work. To my colleague, Georgina Brown, for her scanning expertise. It would not have been possible, I don't think, to have tackled the hogbacks without her input. So huge thanks, George, for all your input. And latterly, another colleague, Vi Peterson, for doing some photogrammetric recording for me. That was much appreciated. And then last but not least, Heather Stoddart, who tidied up all the loose ends and did all the things that I wasn't able to do because lockdown basically took away my last 2 months in the office. And then I retired, and Heather's been picking up the pieces and getting everything on Canmore for me.